the end, the truth is not written in sermons, nor whispered in shadows. It is carved in the silence after the angels of death have gone. For all the prayers, all the hymns, all the monuments and shrines, one reality remains unshakable. To the Space Marines, civilians are nothing. Not soldiers, not allies, not even pawns. They are shadows on the battlefield, flickering briefly in the light of war before vanishing into ash. The Astartes do not hate them, nor pity them, nor mourn them. They simply do not see them. On the battlefield, Marines fight as gods. Their every motion is calculated, their every strike precise, their every moment consumed by the mission. To them, civilians are less than the smoke that curls from burning buildings, less than the rubble that crumbles beneath their boots. If they are noticed at all, it is for an instant, a tool to be used, a liability to be purged, a distraction to be silenced. The Marine does not pause to consider their names, their lives, their histories. To him they are faceless, nameless, irrelevant. In his mind, only war exists, and war leaves no room for humanity. After battle, when silence falls, civilians creep from hiding, blinking into the ruins of their lives. They search for loved ones, for food, for hope. They search for meaning, but the angels of death do not linger. They do not kneel beside the wounded, nor speak words of comfort, nor honor the dead. They depart as they came, thunderous and merciless, vanishing into the void. The people are left with nothing but ashes, blood, and silence. And still, the Imperium demands they call this salvation. Generations pass, but the scars remain. Children born after the war hear stories not of mercy, but of fire. They are taught in schools to honor the angels, to thank them for victories, to see their absence as a blessing. They grow up kneeling before statues that loom like executioners, singing hymns to gods they secretly dread. Entire cultures bend under the weight of these contradictions, their faith hollow, their devotion poisoned. They live lives of obedience, silence, and fear because to question is death. The angels themselves are blind to this legacy. They march ever forward, from war to war, never glancing back, never remembering the faces they left behind. Their minds are shaped for battle, their hearts long since stripped of compassion, their souls consumed by duty. They do not remember the civilians they killed, nor the ones they saved. To them, all mortals blur into one faceless mass, insignificant in the scale of the galaxy. Their memories are filled with battles, not people. Their thoughts are of victory, not survival. Their prayers are to the Emperor, not to the lives of those left in their wake. And yet, there is one truth that civilians deep in their hearts cannot deny. For all their fear, for all their pain, for all their trauma, they still kneel. They still raise their voices in hymns. They still call the Marines saviors, still build monuments in their honor, still teach their children to praise them. They kneel not out of love, but because they have no choice. The Imperium demands it. The ecclesiarchy enforces it. The Inquisition ensures it. And so, generation after generation, the lie becomes truth. The angels of death are saviors. The angels of death are holy. The angels of death are to be worshipped. And no one dares speak the truth aloud, that the angels do not see them at all. This is the great irony of the Imperium. The civilians of the galaxy live and die for gods who do not know their names. They bleed and burn for angels who do not see their faces. They worship executioners, revere monsters, and pray to beings who pass them by without thought. And still they kneel, for in the grim darkness of the far future, kneeling is survival. To stand is to rebel. To rebel is to die. The Marines will never change. They are not built for change. They are not built for mercy, nor compassion, nor remembrance. They are built for war, and so long as the galaxy burns, they will march forever, blind to the lives they crush beneath their boots. They will slaughter, they will purge, they will cleanse, they will leave nothing but silence. And the civilians will rebuild again, haunted again, broken again, worshipping again. The cycle is eternal, endless, unbreakable. In the end, the question is not how Space Marines see civilians. The question is whether they see them at all. And the answer, whispered in the ashes of 1,000 burned worlds, is no. To the angels of death, civilians are less than dust. They are echoes swallowed by the roar of bolters, shadows erased by the fire of war. And in that truth lies the deepest horror of all. Not cruelty, not malice, but indifference. For to be hated is to be acknowledged, but to be nothing is to be forgotten, and so, in the grim darkness of the far future, humanity lives beneath the shadow of gods who do not see them, who do not remember them, who do not care. The angels of death march ever onward, blind to the lives they shatter, deaf to the screams they leave behind, their hearts empty, their duty endless. Civilians kneel in silence, their faith hollow, their fear eternal, their truth unspoken. There are no heroes. There is no mercy. There is only war. Not all scars left by the angels of death fester into silence or fear. Some mutate into something far more dangerous, zealotry. The Imperium thrives on this transformation, bending trauma into faith, forging broken survivors into fanatics who worship the very beings that shattered their lives. Space Marines themselves do not care for worship, but the machine of the Imperium ensures that every massacre, every purge, every merciless act is reshaped into holy legend. Civilians who might have cursed the angels of death instead find themselves molded into zealots, their fear twisted until it becomes a weapon. It begins with the priests. In the aftermath of devastation, they descend upon the ruins with words instead of bolters. They stand before the masses, their voices rising above the weeping, declaring that those who died were blessed, that their slaughter was sacrifice, that the fire was cleansing. They paint the Marines not as executioners, but as the Emperor's instruments, wholly beyond understanding, their cruelty the mark of divinity. To question them is heresy, to mourn is weakness. To accept their words is the only path to survival. And so the survivors nod through their tears, repeating words they do not believe, until repetition turns into habit, and habit becomes truth. The trauma of survivors becomes fuel for zealotry. A woman whose children were killed by stray bolter fire kneels in the ashes and tells herself they were chosen by the Emperor. A man who watched his neighbors burned alive convinces himself they were tainted, that their screams were proof of their corruption. Communities ravaged by Marine campaigns rebuild not with resentment, but with fanatic devotion, praising the angels louder than ever before, their voices rising in desperate hysteria. Their worship is not born from love, but from desperation. To believe the angels are monsters is to live in despair. To believe they are gods is to survive. And so despair is buried, replaced by zealotry as a shield against madness. The Imperium encourages this transformation. Shrines are built over mass graves, cathedrals rise from ruins still stained with blood, monuments to the angels of death tower above the bones of the slain. Survivors are commanded to offer thanks, to light candles for those who fell, to recite litanies of gratitude for the very destruction they endured. Children are taught not of the slaughter, but of the miracle, not of the fear, but of the glory. They are told that the Marines' cruelty was proof of holiness, that their ruthlessness was mercy, that their terror was love. They grow up chanting prayers to warriors who would kill them without hesitation, and in time, they begin to believe. What begins as hollow worship becomes genuine devotion. The mind breaks, reshapes itself, finds meaning in suffering where none existed. Survivors who once trembled at the thought of the angels now fall to their knees at the sound of their names. They beg for their return, even as they remember the fire. They sing hymns to their glory, even as their dreams are filled with screams. They paint their armor in childish drawings, even as their families lie buried beneath rubble. Their trauma becomes faith, their faith becomes fanaticism, and fanaticism becomes a prison tighter than fear ever was. The Marines themselves are indifferent to this. When they return to these worlds centuries later, they do not see the shrines built in their image or the people who chant their names. They see only another battlefield, another mission, another enemy to kill. They do not pause to acknowledge the devotion. They do not care for the monuments. They march past them without a glance, their weapons ready, their voices silent. To them, worship means nothing. Only obedience matters. Only victory matters. Only the mission matters. But for the Imperium, this zealotry is invaluable. Populations reshaped into fanatics are easier to control. They do not rebel, for rebellion is heresy. They do not question, for questioning is blasphemy. They live lives of devotion, their every act offered to the Emperor, their every thought shackled by fear disguised as love. When war comes again, these zealots march willingly to their deaths, offering their children as soldiers, their lives as sacrifices, their cities as fortresses. They do not hesitate, for they believe themselves blessed to serve. Their trauma has been twisted into loyalty, their silence into song, their despair into zeal. Yet beneath this fanaticism, the truth never dies. Survivors who were reshaped into zealots still carry their scars. Their devotion is louder, but it is brittle. Behind their hymns lies memory. Behind their worship lies silence. Behind their prayers lies fear. They worship the angels, but deep down they remember the fire. They tell themselves their faith is real, but in the shadows of their hearts, they know it is built on lies. Still, they kneel, still they sing, still they obey, because the alternative is despair, and despair is unendurable. This cycle repeats across countless worlds. Marines descend in fire, slaughter without mercy, and leave. Priests arrive, twist suffering into devotion, and demand worship. Survivors obey, first in fear, then in desperation, then in fanaticism. Generations later, children grow up in cultures where the angels of death are revered as gods. Where to question them is unthinkable. Where to doubt is death. They carry the trauma of their ancestors without knowing it, their faith poisoned from birth, their zealotry a mask hiding silence. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is no truth. There is only what the Imperium demands the people believe, and so civilians do not remember the Marines as monsters. They remember them as gods. They do not whisper curses. They shout hymns. They do not weep for the dead. They celebrate their sacrifice. And all the while the angels themselves march on, indifferent, blind to the devotion, deaf to the worship, caring only for war. The greatest irony of all is that civilians pray for the return of the angels, even as those prayers summon their own destruction. They kneel for salvation, and salvation comes in bolters and fire. They beg for deliverance, and deliverance arrives in purges and ashes. They worship the monsters, and in worshiping them, they give them power. It is a cycle without end, an endless spiral of trauma turned into faith, fear turned into zeal, suffering turned into devotion, a cycle as eternal as war itself. When the angels of death depart a world, they leave more than rubble and corpses behind. They leave silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of fear so deep it burrows into the marrow of survivors and lingers for generations. Civilians do not rebuild with hope. They rebuild with trembling hands, haunted eyes, and whispers that echo long after the Marines' warships vanish into the void. For the Space Marines, the campaign is finished. The enemy is broken. The mission is complete. But for the mortals who remain, the battle never ends. Its ghosts linger, shaping entire cultures into monuments of trauma. In the ruins of cities purged by fire, survivors gather what little remains. They scavenge food from blackened corpses, tear wood from shattered homes, and drink from rivers fouled with blood. Their prayers are no longer hymns of gratitude, but whispers of fear. Prayers that the angels never return. Prayers that their children never draw the gaze of the Astartes again. Yet in public they speak differently. In public they praise the angels for their salvation, thank them for their judgment, honor them as gods. The priests demand it, the Inquisition enforces it, and the Imperium leaves no room for dissent. So the survivors live two lives, one of praise shouted to the skies, and another of terror whispered in the dark. The trauma seeps into every corner of their lives. Children raised among the ruins grow up with nightmares of towering figures in ceramite armor, of voices that thundered like storms, of screams drowned by bolter fire. They wake in the night crying, and their parents hush them quickly, terrified the wrong ear will hear. Schools teach them to revere the angels, to draw their images in ink and paint, to sing hymns of loyalty. Yet every time they sketch a Marine's helmet, their hands shake. Every time they hear their names invoked in sermons, their hearts race. They are taught devotion, but what they inherit is dread. Over time, entire cultures form around this silence. On some worlds, civilians refuse to speak above whispers in the presence of statues of the Astartes, fearing their voices will bring judgment. On others, families leave offerings of food or trinkets at shrines, not out of love, but out of terror, as if bribing the angels to stay away. Some communities hold nights of vigil, where no one speaks, no one sings, no one prays aloud. For these are the nights they remember the fire and the slaughter. The Imperium sees these practices as devotion. The ecclesiarchy proclaims them faith. But in truth, they are rituals of fear, scars written into tradition, trauma disguised as worship. The Marines never notice. They come and go like storms descending upon a world in fire and thunder, then vanishing into the void to wage another war. They do not look back at the ruins, nor the people left behind. They do not think of the children who cry at their shadows, nor the families who rebuild their homes atop the bones of the slain. To them, the civilians are irrelevant. They served their purpose, or they did not. They lived, or they died. What matters is the mission. And so they leave, blind to the scars they carved into human hearts, deaf to the whispers that follow in their wake. But those scars last lifetimes. Survivors pass their stories to their children, and their children pass them on again. Each generation grows up fearing the angels more than the Xenos or the heretic. They know the aliens may kill them, the heretics may corrupt them, but the angels of death may kill them without reason, without warning, without mercy. And so, an entire lineage grows under the weight of this fear, each life defined by silence. Sometimes these scars twist into something darker. Hatred simmers beneath the surface, unspoken but unforgotten. In the shadows of the Imperium, hidden cults whisper not of chaos, but of revenge. They tell stories of ancestors slaughtered by bolters, of homes burned in the name of purity, of lives ended in silence. They carve their hatred into walls, into flesh, into memory. They cannot act, not openly, not against the Imperium, but their hatred festers, feeding the very corruption the Marines sought to prevent. For in trying to cleanse worlds of weakness, the Astartes create wounds that never heal. And yet, even as survivors curse them in secret, they still kneel in public. They still chant the hymns, still raise their hands in prayer, still thank the Emperor for his angels. This is the greatest cruelty of all, that fear binds them so tightly they become their own jailers. Their worship is hollow, but it is endless, a prison built from silence. And silence is what the Imperium thrives upon. Silence ensures obedience. Silence keeps rebellion buried. Silence feeds the machine of war, generation after generation. To live in the shadow of the angels is to live in contradiction. Civilians are told the Marines are saviors, yet they remember them as executioners. They are taught to revere them as gods, yet they whisper of them as monsters. They are forced to raise monuments to them, yet those monuments are built on the bones of the dead. They must praise them aloud while cursing them in secret, worship them in daylight while fearing them in darkness. This contradiction is the essence of life in the Imperium. It is faith built on lies, devotion born from terror, obedience forged from trauma. In the end, the Space Marines do not see civilians at all. They do not see the ruins they leave behind, nor the generations scarred by their presence. They see only battlefields, only missions, only enemies to be destroyed. Civilians are shadows. At the edge of their vision, fleeting shapes that mean nothing in the face of war. And so, the Marines continue their eternal crusade, blind to the scars they leave behind, deaf to the silence that grows ever deeper in their wake. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is no healing. There is no comfort. There is only fear carved into the souls of survivors, passed from father to son, mother to daughter, world to world. The angels of death. To most of the Imperium citizens, the Adeptus Astartes are angels. To others, they are saviors, warriors, or gods. But for many who survive their presence, who see their cold eyes behind glowing lenses and watch their merciless deeds unfold, another truth takes hold. The angels of death are monsters. Not the beasts of Xenos nightmares, nor the demons of chaos, but something far more terrifying. monsters of humanity itself, shaped from flesh and blood and made into beings who have forgotten what it means to be men. It begins in the silence of aftermath. A city lies in ruins, its streets blackened, its people slaughtered, its survivors kneeling among ashes. The Marines stand amidst the destruction, their armor caked with gore and soot, their weapons still smoking. To the ecclesiarchy, this is a holy sight. To the priests, the corpses are offerings to the emperor. But to the civilians who lived through it, who lost children beneath bolter fire and saw neighbors burned alive by flamers, the truth is different. They see not angels, but demons of iron, who walk through blood without pause, who kill without hesitation, who leave only silence behind. Children are the first to see it. They do not carry the heavy chains of faith as their parents do. Their minds are not yet shackled by the sermons of priests. To them, the Marines are towering nightmares, their visors glowing like the eyes of predators in the dark. They remember the sound of their voices, thunderous and cold, barking commands without kindness. They remember the weight of their boots shaking the earth, the hiss of their weapons spitting death into crowds. For the children, the angels of death are the monsters under their beds, given flesh and steel. They whisper of them in the night, trembling at shadows, praying they never return. But the adults cannot admit this truth, not even to themselves. To call the angels monsters is heresy. To speak it aloud is to invite death from priest or inquisitor alike. And so they bury the thought, convincing themselves that what they saw was holy, that the blood and fire were blessings, that the terror was faith. Yet even as their lips whisper prayers, their eyes betray them. They cannot look upon the Marines without flinching. They cannot hear their voices without shuddering. In their hearts, the truth gnaws silently. Their saviors are monsters who wear the mask of angels. The Marines themselves do nothing to dispel this image. They are not men, not anymore. Their gene seed strips away their humanity, replacing it with something cold, efficient, alien. They do not laugh, do not weep, do not grieve. They do not pause to comfort nor bend to aid. They kill without hesitation, without remorse, without hesitation. To civilians, this absence of humanity is more terrifying than any alien beast. A Xenos is an enemy, a monster to be fought. But the angels are men, or at least they once were. And to see what men can become under the Emperor's hand is to know a terror deeper than any demonic vision. Stories spread in whispers, carried from world to world by traders and refugees. They tell of Marines who slaughtered entire districts to cleanse a whisper of heresy, who herded thousands of innocents into fire to buy a few seconds in battle, who crushed a city beneath orbital bombardment for the sake of a single fallen artifact. These stories are told quietly, hidden from priests, passed between trembling lips in the dark. They are not sermons. They are warnings. They paint the angels not as saviors, but as predators who hunt their own kind, demons in armor who serve no one but the Emperor's will. Over time, these whispers become myths of their own. In the underhives of hive worlds, mothers frighten their children into obedience with tales of angels who will come if they disobey, who will drag them away in the night, who will burn them alive for crying too loudly. In the frontier colonies, men speak of armored giants who slaughtered entire towns, leaving only silence behind. To the ecclesiarchy, these are lies, heresies to be silenced. But to the common man, they are truth, for they have seen the monsters themselves, and they know what fear looks like. The Marines, of course, do not care. To them, fear is useful. If the civilians see them as monsters, so be it. Monsters command obedience. Monsters silence rebellion. Monsters keep the masses trembling and compliant. They do not crave adoration, nor seek love. They are beyond such things. If fear keeps the Imperium strong, then fear is holy. If terror bends the people to the Emperor's will, then terror is faith. The Marines embrace their monstrous image because in war, monsters are necessary. But the cost is immense. Civilians live not in devotion, but in dread. They pray not for salvation, but for survival. Their faith becomes hollow, poisoned by terror, shaped not by hope, but by fear of judgment. They worship the Emperor not as a father, but as a tyrant whose angels are his executioners. And deep in their hearts they know the truth. The angels of death are not their protectors. They are hunters, and humanity itself is their prey. In the grim darkness of the far future, there are no heroes. There are no saviors. There are only monsters wearing the armor of angels, walking among mortals with bolters and blades, their eyes blind to compassion, their hearts hollow, their hands stained with the blood of those they were meant to protect. And still the people kneel. For in the Imperium, kneeling is survival, and to name a monster for what it is to invite death swifter than any Xenos blade. Fear is the Imperium's oldest weapon. It binds its people in silence, drives them to obedience, and keeps entire planets in line with little more than the whisper of punishment. Nowhere is this fear sharper, more absolute, than in the presence of the Adeptus Astartes. To see a space marine is to stand in the shadow of a god, but a god who demands obedience, not love. Civilians who survive encounters with them do not remember salvation. They remember terror, and that terror becomes worship, twisted and poisoned, passed down to their children like a curse. When Marines march through the streets, there is no sound but the thunder of their boots and the hum of their weapons. Civilians kneel instinctively, not out of devotion but out of fear. They press their foreheads to the ground, trembling, too afraid to meet the gaze of lenses that glow like the eyes of angels carved from steel. Children cry into their mother's arms, not daring to raise their voices above a whimper. The old clutch their prayer beads so tightly that blood stains their hands. They do not look upon the Marines with joy. They look upon them as beasts of war barely restrained, predators who could slaughter them all at a whim. The terror does not fade after battle. Survivors remember the Marines' voices, cold and commanding, their presence overwhelming, their actions merciless. They remember how easily they killed, how little hesitation they showed, how quickly they turned their weapons upon civilians as upon enemies. These memories echo for years, poisoning the survivors' dreams. They whisper to their children of the angels who came in fire and thunder, who saved the world but slaughtered neighbors, who left behind ruins and silence. The children grow up fearing the day the angels return. They kneel in worship because they are told to, because to doubt is heresy, but deep in their hearts they tremble. The ecclesiarchy exploits this fear, shaping it into devotion. Priests stand in the ruins of cities purged by Marines and preach that the dead were blessed, that their slaughter was the Emperor's will, that the angels' mercilessness is proof of their holiness. They demand that the survivors not mourn but praise, not fear but worship. They twist the screams of the dying into hymns of faith, and the people, broken and desperate, comply. They kneel before the statues of the Astartes, whisper prayers to the very hands that killed them, and teach their children to do the same. Fear becomes ritual. Terror becomes dogma. Yet beneath the surface, the truth festers. Survivors speak only in shadows, only in whispers too quiet for priests to hear. They tell each other what they saw. The Marine crushing a boy's skull beneath his gauntlet for crying too loudly. The woman burned alive in her home because suspicion fell upon her. The crowd herded into enemy fire as shields. They do not dare speak these truths in daylight. To accuse the Emperor's angels of cruelty is to invite death by the Inquisition, or worse. But in the privacy of their homes, in the dark corners of ruined shelters, the truth is remembered. It festers like a wound, a scar across the soul of entire generations. Children raised in these shadows inherit more than prayers. They inherit the fear. They learn from birth to keep their voices low when speaking of the angels. They are taught to kneel instantly if ever a Marine appears, to avoid their gaze, to never speak unless commanded. They are told stories not of mercy, but of judgment, of entire hives purged, of worlds burned, of cities reduced to ash beneath ceramite boots. These stories are meant to terrify, and they succeed. By the time these children grow, they kneel in prayer not because they love the Emperor's angels, but because they fear their wrath. And yet, the cycle never breaks. For when the angels return, when another war burns across the stars, when another city falls to chaos or Xenos, the same rituals repeat. Civilians kneel in awe and terror. Priests proclaim the slaughter holy. Survivors bury their pain beneath layers of obedience. And once again the angels depart, leaving behind only ruins, silence, and a faith born not from devotion, but from fear. The Marines themselves are blind to this. They do not see the fear they inspire as cruelty. To them, fear is a tool, a weapon as sharp as any chainsword. If civilians tremble, they obey. If they kneel, they stay silent. If they worship, even in terror, they do not resist. For the Marines, this is enough. They do not crave love nor gratitude. They crave order. They crave obedience, and fear delivers both. In their minds, fear is not poison but discipline, not cruelty but necessity. Fear keeps civilians alive long enough to be useful, and in the eyes of the Astartes, usefulness is the only measure of value. For the Imperium, this cycle of fear is a hidden strength. Worlds scarred by Marine intervention rarely rebel. Their people are too broken, too silent, too terrified to ever rise up. They become obedient subjects, kneeling even at the whisper of the Emperor's name, shuddering at the memory of angels who may one day return. And so the Imperium thrives on their silence, their obedience, their fear. It spreads from generation to generation, shaping entire cultures into hushed reverence. It becomes the fabric of life itself, invisible yet unbreakable, binding mortals to the Emperor's will forever. But the cost is incalculable. The people's faith is hollow, their worship poisoned, their obedience born not from love, but from terror. They kneel not because they believe, but because they fear. They praise not because they see salvation, but because they have seen death. Their faith is empty, their devotion twisted, their souls broken. They live lives defined by silence, by whispers, by terror passed from father to son, from mother to daughter. And in the grim darkness of the far future, this is all that remains. In the end, civilians learn that to live in the shadow of the angels of death is not to live in safety, but in perpetual dread. They learn that their worship is not devotion, but submission. They learn that their children will inherit not faith, but fear. And yet they kneel all the same, for in the Imperium, silence is survival, obedience is salvation, and terror is the only truth left to mankind. The Imperium's greatest fear is not death, but corruption. Armies can be raised, weapons forged, cities rebuilt. But a whisper of heresy, a single infection of Xenos taint, a fleeting shadow of chaos. These are diseases that spread faster than any plague, devouring worlds in silence before the war ever begins. And in the eyes of the Space Marines, there is only one cure: fire. To them, civilians are not innocent lives to be protected. They are risks to be measured, liabilities to be culled, populations to be purged when even the faintest suspicion arises. When the angels of death descend upon a world scarred by war, they do not arrive as saviors. They arrive as judges. They do not ask questions. They do not hold trials. They look into the faces of terrified men and women, and they see only weakness. Weakness is danger. Weakness invites heresy. Weakness must be burned away before it festers into something greater. For the Space Marine, hesitation is treason against the Emperor's will, and treason cannot be allowed to live. Civilians rarely understand this until it is too late. They see the towering giants in their holy armor and believe they are saved. They crowd into the streets to welcome them, their voices raised in hymns, their hands reaching out in trembling devotion. But the Marines do not look upon them with mercy. Their lenses do not see faces, only probabilities. In the chaos of war, every civilian is a potential cultist, a hidden mutant, a carrier of filth. Their songs of praise mean nothing. Their tears mean nothing. Their faith means nothing. Only suspicion matters. And suspicion is everywhere. A family huddled in a ruined chapel may be executed for surviving too long in enemy territory. A man whose eyes shift too nervously may be deemed a heretic and shot in the head without a word. An entire district may be razed simply because a patrol of Marines smelled incense that did not belong to the ecclesiarchy. These judgments are not made with malice. They are made with certainty, cold and absolute. For the Marines, it is better to slaughter thousands of innocents than to allow one heretic to live. It is better to burn a world clean than to risk contamination spreading beyond its borders. To them, extermination is not cruelty. It is prevention. It is salvation in its most brutal form. There are moments of horror civilians never forget. The thunder of bolters echoing through the narrow streets as Marines cleanse a marketplace crowded with terrified families. The hiss of flamers filling a shelter where children cry for mercy. The sight of a dreadnought's massive frame crushing houses where survivors begged for protection. The angels of death move without hesitation, their weapons singing hymns of slaughter, their voices silent but for orders that reduce entire neighborhoods to ash. For the civilians it is betrayal. For the Marines it is duty. The ecclesiarchy calls these acts purgation. They write sermons about the holiness of fire, about how the emperor's light burns away the impure. They teach the survivors to believe that their neighbors, their families, their children died for a reason, that their deaths were necessary for mankind's survival. They demand gratitude for annihilation. And the survivors, broken and trembling, repeat the words through tears. They bow before the charred ruins of their homes and whisper thanks to the angels who killed them. They force themselves to believe, because the alternative, that their protectors murdered them without cause, is too terrible to endure. But some cannot accept the lie. They remember too clearly the faces of their loved ones, the terror in their eyes as the Marines turned their weapons upon them. They remember the silence afterward, the way the angels of death marched on without pause, without remorse, without a single glance back. These survivors do not whisper thanks. They whisper curses, hidden in shadows, their hatred festering like an unhealed wound. But hatred is dangerous. The Imperium has no tolerance for those who question, and so these whispers are drowned out by fear until they fade into silence. The truth civilians can never accept is that the Marines themselves do not see cruelty in these acts. Their minds, reshaped by gene seed and decades of indoctrination, cannot comprehend the suffering of mortals. They do not see families, children, or innocents. They see only the mission. The Emperor's will demands purity, and purity demands sacrifice. They believe that by slaughtering the few, they protect the many. They believe that by burning worlds, they save the galaxy. To them, extermination is not a crime. It is salvation written in fire and blood. Some chapters are harsher than others. The Black Templars purge entire populations without hesitation, their zealous fury seeing heresy in every shadow. The Dark Angels watch with suspicion, their paranoia condemning millions in the name of secrets none will ever know. Even among the more merciful chapters, there is no true compassion. The Ultramarines may order evacuations, may speak words of command rather than bolts of death. But when doubt arises, their bolters roar as surely as any other. There is no chapter that spares civilians when danger threatens the mission. None are free from the curse of cold necessity. In the end, civilians learn the truth not from words, but from fire. They learn it when the angels of death descend not as protectors, but as executioners. They learn it when their homes are torched, when their families are gunned down, when their cities are reduced to rubble in the name of purity. They learn it as their voices choke on smoke, as their prayers dissolve into screams, as their faith burns to ash. And still, the Imperium demands that they call it salvation. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is no safety, not even in faith. The Space Marines do not see civilians as children of the Emperor. They see them as potential threats, risks to be eliminated, liabilities to be burned away. To the angels of death, the innocent do not exist. There is only the mission, and the mission demands blood. Always blood. For the common man, survival in war means hiding, fleeing, or clinging to faith. But for the Space Marine, civilians are not survivors. They are tools. In the eyes of the Adeptus Astartes, those who cannot fight are not spared from duty. Instead, they are bent, reshaped, and consumed for the mission at hand. The Marines do not ask for volunteers. They do not explain their purpose. They point, they command, and the civilians obey, or they die. The use of civilians begins with information. The angels of death descend into war zones blind to the labyrinthine warrens of hives, the twisted tunnels of manufactoria, the fractured streets of crumbling cities. To them, civilians are maps given flesh. A man who has lived his entire life in a hive's underbelly knows shortcuts, forgotten passages, hidden vents. A woman who worked the factories knows which halls collapse under fire, which lifts are still powered, which corridors lead to sealed strongholds. These are treasures more valuable than gold, but the Marines do not treat such knowledge with gratitude. They take it. If a civilian hesitates, they are beaten. If they lie, they are executed. And if they guide truly, they are discarded as soon as their usefulness ends, a bolter round silencing them to prevent the risk of betrayal. The civilians who serve as guides often never return. They lead squads of ceramite-clad giants through alleys and tunnels, hearts hammering with terror as battle rages on every side. They see horrors no mortal was meant to see, Xenos feeding on the living, cultists sacrificing children in fire, demons crawling from shadows that should not exist. They stumble, weep, cry out, but the Marines march forward. When the guide finally breaks, collapsing in panic, a gauntleted fist or the bark of a bolt pistol ends their suffering instantly. The Marines do not pause. They step over the body and continue the mission. The map has served its purpose, and like all tools, it is cast aside. Other civilians are pressed into labor. Marines have neither the time nor the inclination to drag supplies, to repair broken defenses, to clear rubble from streets. But humans are plentiful and expendable. In sieges, whole crowds are rounded up and forced to haul ammunition crates, to carry promethium canisters, to dig trenches in the shadow of artillery fire. They collapse under the weight, their bones breaking, their muscles tearing, but the Marines demand more. Whips crack, bolters bark, and the line continues. Those who fall are left behind. Those who falter are executed as examples. The Marines do not see workers. They see bodies with hands. Hands that can carry, hands that can dig, hands that can build, hands that are easily replaced. There are darker uses still. In the heat of war, civilians are driven ahead of Marine lines as living shields. The logic is cruel but undeniable. An enemy hesitates to fire upon the innocent, if only for a heartbeat, and that heartbeat is enough for the Marines to strike. Civilians scream as they are herded into gunfire, their bodies shredded by las bolts and shrapnel, their blood painting the streets. Behind them, the angels of death advance untouched, bolters roaring, chainswords shrieking. The civilians buy the Marines seconds with their lives, and in war, seconds are eternity. None survive long and none are mourned. They are not sacrifices. They are ammunition. Ammunition that bleeds. Even after the battle is won, the civilians' role as tools does not end. Survivors are pressed into service to bury corpses, to burn heretics, to scrub the blood from the stones. They are forced to rebuild shattered defenses, to clear minefields, to search rubble for signs of cultist taint. The Marines oversee all with cold precision, their commands brooking no refusal. Civilians who weep for their dead are beaten. Those who cling to the bodies of their loved ones are dragged away. The work must continue, because the war never ends, and the Marines cannot wait. To the civilians, this treatment is incomprehensible. They are taught from birth that the Emperor's angels fight for humanity, that they protect the flock, that they are mankind's champions. And yet, when they kneel before them, they are treated as cattle. When they beg for mercy, they are given orders. When they give their service, they are discarded. The contradiction gnaws at their hearts, but they bury it under layers of faith. Priests tell them that their suffering is holy, that their labor is a form of worship, that to die in service to the angels is to die in the Emperor's light. And so, many civilians convince themselves that being used is honor, that being discarded is martyrdom, that being slaughtered is salvation. Without this lie, despair would consume them utterly. The Marines themselves do not see this contradiction. To them, the logic is simple. A weapon is used until it breaks, then discarded. A shield is raised until it shatters, then replaced. Civilians are no different. They are not brothers of the chapter. They are not warriors remade by the gene seed. They are not instruments of glory forged by centuries of battle. They are soft, fragile, fleeting. They serve in whatever capacity they can, and when they cannot, they are gone. The Marines feel no guilt, no hesitation, no doubt. For them, this is the Emperor's will, and his will is all that matters. And yet, in the silence between battles, civilians whisper the truth. They whisper of friends marched into fire, of families pressed into slavery, of neighbors executed for faltering. They whisper of the angels' coldness, of their merciless eyes, of the way they see mortals not as men but as fuel. They whisper, but only in shadows, only in silence, for to speak too loudly is to invite death. And so, the whispers become ghosts, haunting the ruins long after the Marines depart. In the end, the truth is undeniable. Civilians are not spared, not cherished, not saved. They are tools, maps, hands, shields, fuel, and tools are meant to be used until they break. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is no mercy, not even for the faithful. The angels of death see civilians not as lives, but as instruments of war. And when war consumes all things, instruments are all that remain. When war descends upon a world, civilians think first of survival. They cling to their families, gather possessions, flee to basements or temples, or huddle in shelters praying for deliverance. But to a space marine, these instincts are not only meaningless, they are dangerous. In the eyes of the Adeptus Astartes, civilians are liabilities. They clog streets with their panicked flight, block supply routes, reveal positions to the enemy, and in their fear they whisper treason or spread rumors that fracture morale. A Marine does not see frightened men and women struggling to live. He sees a distraction, a weakness, a variable in the battlefield equation that must be removed. The cities of the Imperium are labyrinths of flesh and stone, packed with billions of souls. When enemies invade, these places become killing grounds, choke points of fire and rubble. Marines landing in such environments treat civilians not as citizens but as obstacles. Crowds are dispersed with force. Those who run in the wrong direction are cut down, not because the Marines hate them, but because hesitation cannot be allowed. Every moment wasted on the fears of the masses is a moment the enemy advances. To the angels of death, speed and precision matter more than the lives of 1,000 bystanders. The concept of mercy is foreign to the Astartes. In their training, weakness is purged, hesitation is punished, compassion is stripped away. What remains is a mind sharpened like a blade, honed to see only threats and objectives. Civilians do not fit into this framework. They are not enemies to be killed nor brothers to be saved. They are an undefined variable, and undefined variables are purged. A Marine will order civilians out of a war zone with the same voice he uses to order his brothers to advance. But when the civilians stumble, when they falter, when they weep, his response is not empathy, it is execution. One example is enough. One shot into the chest of a panicked man silences an entire crowd. Obedience through terror is faster than hurting through kindness, and speed is all that matters. Worse still is when civilians are suspected of taint. In the eyes of the Astartes, hesitation and impurity often walk hand in hand. A trembling family huddled in a corner may be judged as collaborators, heretics, or cowards. A group of stragglers too slow to evacuate may be accused of hiding Xenos spores or chaos corruption. The judgment is swift and absolute. Flamers are turned on the shelters. Bolter rounds roar into unarmed crowds. In a single moment, hundreds die, their ashes scattered into the streets. To the Marines, this is not cruelty. It is cleansing. It is prevention. It is ensuring the enemy finds no foothold among the weak. To the civilians, it is betrayal of the deepest kind. They prayed for saviors, and instead found executioners. And yet, the logic of the Astartes is unassailable in their own eyes. For them, a single infected soul can doom a regiment. A whispered rumor of heresy can topple morale. An act of cowardice can open a breach that kills thousands. Better to burn the crowd than risk the contamination spreading. Better to silence the cries than let them echo into rebellion. Better to cull the weak than let their weakness endanger the mission. To the Marines, the calculus is simple. 1,000 civilians mean nothing compared to a single failure. The survivors live in terror of this truth. They learn quickly that to falter is to die, that to hesitate is to draw the wrath of gods who do not forgive. Mothers silence their children with trembling hands, terrified that a single cry will draw a bolt round. Fathers push their families to run faster, even as their lungs tear, knowing that slowing will mean death. Old men collapse in the streets, their bodies left behind as warnings, their blood marking the ground like a message to all who pass. Obedience is survival. Disobedience is death. The Marines do not look down. They do not speak words of comfort. They march over the bodies as though they are stones. In some campaigns, entire populations are deemed liabilities. When a world is deemed beyond saving, when the taint of chaos is too deep, when Xenos corruption spreads unseen, the Marines do not bother with separation of the innocent from the guilty. They purge. Entire hives are put to the torch, millions slaughtered, their screams drowned out by the roar of bolters and the crackle of promethium. To the civilians, it is the end of all things, the destruction of their lives by those they worshipped. To the Marines, it is simply another battle, another mission, another necessity. Their duty is not to save lives. Their duty is to ensure victory. If that victory demands annihilation, then annihilation is holy. The bitterness of the survivors is indescribable. Those who live through such purges carry scars not only on their flesh, but on their faith. They whisper of angels who came not to save, but to slaughter, of gods who killed more of their kin than the enemy ever did. But these whispers are dangerous. The ecclesiarchy silences them, branding them heresy. The priests proclaim that the dead were martyrs, their deaths holy sacrifices, and the survivors are forced to bow their heads and nod, even as their hearts rage with grief and betrayal. To speak the truth aloud is to invite another purge, another bolt round, another fire. So they remain silent, their faith shattered, but their voices chained. The Marines never notice. They do not care. Once the mission is complete, once the enemy is broken, once the ashes of the cities cool, they depart. They leave the survivors kneeling in the ruins, whispering thanks through bloody lips, convinced they were saved, even as they mourn the thousands slain by their so-called protectors. To the Marines, it does not matter whether the civilians hate or love them. It does not matter whether they believe or despair. Their purpose is not to be loved. Their purpose is to wage war, and in war there is no room for the weak. And so, civilians learn the truth the hard way, that in the eyes of the Astartes, they are not children of the Emperor, but burdens to be endured or purged. They are liabilities, and liabilities are erased. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is no mercy, not even from the angels of death. To be seen by a space marine is not to be saved. It is to be measured, weighed, and discarded if found wanting. And in a galaxy where want is endless, most are discarded. Faith in the Imperium is not a choice. It is the air one breathes, the chain that binds all lives. From the cradle to the grave, Every man, woman, and child is taught that the Emperor watches, that his angels defend, that the Adeptus Astartes are the living embodiment of his divine will. In every shrine, in every sermon, the Marines are spoken of not as soldiers, but as saviors. Their images are painted on cathedral walls, carved into monuments, etched into the very souls of the faithful. To doubt them is heresy, punishable by fire. To question them is betrayal, punishable by death. And so, civilians grow up with their minds shackled by awe. When war comes, when the sky tears open and death falls in fire and ruin, this faith rises like a desperate shield. Families gather in the ruins of churches. Mothers clutch their children, men whisper prayers, all waiting for the angels of death to descend. They do not fear them, because they believe in the stories. They believe that the Marines will come to protect them, to guide them, to save them from annihilation. They believe that their lives matter, that their cries will be heard, that their blood is precious, and then the angels arrive. The ground shakes with their steps, the air cracks with their weapons, their voices thunder with commands that echo through the ruins. To the faithful, it is the arrival of gods. Tears stream down the faces of children who think they are saved. Old men fall to their knees whispering hymns. Women raise their hands to touch the boots of their saviors. For a heartbeat, hope is real, but that heartbeat never lasts. The reality of what the Marines are quickly shatters the illusion. Their voices are not voices of comfort, but commands barked without compassion. Move. Silence. Obey. There is no room for pleading, no time for questions, no tolerance for weakness. Civilians who hesitate, who falter, who cling to possessions or loved ones too long, are struck down without pause. A bolt round tears through a panicked man's chest because he blocked a firing line. A woman is crushed beneath a Marine's armored gauntlet because she froze in the street. A child's cry is silenced by a shove that breaks bone. None of it is done in cruelty. None of it is personal. But it is all merciless. The civilians do not understand this. They cannot. Their faith tells them that the angels protect the weak, that they save lives. When they see one of their own slaughtered in the path of the Marines, their minds twist desperately to explain it. Perhaps he was a heretic. Perhaps she was impure. Perhaps the child was already lost. To think otherwise, to see the truth, is too much to bear, and so they lie to themselves. They cling tighter to their faith even as it betrays them. The priests of the ecclesiarchy encourage this blindness. They march beside the civilians, raising relics high, shouting that the Marines' actions are holy, that every corpse left behind is part of the Emperor's plan. They call it purgation, cleansing, the fire of faith. The faithful believe because they must. To lose faith in the Emperor's angels is to lose all hope, and in a galaxy of endless darkness, hope is the only light mortals can cling to. But there are always those who see too clearly. A father watches his child trampled beneath ceramite boots and feels no holiness in the act. A woman watches her husband executed for panicking and cannot find the Emperor's love in that death. A young man sees his neighbors herded into gunfire as living shields and knows this is no salvation. These civilians do not cheer. They do not kneel. They watch in silence, their eyes hollow, their faith shattered. But silence is dangerous. To speak aloud what they see would bring death swifter than any Xenos blade. So they bury the truth inside themselves, let it fester like rot, and pretend to believe. The Space Marines themselves are blind to this struggle. They do not see faith, nor doubt, nor despair. They see only obstacles and objectives. Civilians exist only as logistical considerations. Crowds to be dispersed, resources to be consumed, potential threats to be eliminated. Faith means nothing to them. The hymns, the prayers, the tears, they do not register. Their minds are honed for war, their bodies remade for killing. To them, the adoration of civilians is like the buzzing of flies. They do not hear it, they do not feel it, they do not care. And yet the civilians continue to believe. Even as their loved ones are slaughtered, even as their homes burn, even as their blood soaks the streets beneath the boots of the angels, they believe. They must. Because if the angels are not saviors, if they are not holy, then what remains? Nothing but the truth, that mankind is alone, that the Emperor's so-called protectors are weapons without mercy, that humanity survives not because it is cherished, but because it is useful. And for most mortals, that truth is unbearable. In the aftermath of battle, when the enemy is broken and the Marines depart, the survivors gather among the ruins. They kneel in the ashes, whispering thanks to the Emperor for their deliverance. They praise the angels for saving them, even though more of their neighbors were killed by Marine hands than by the foe. They convince themselves it was necessary, that the Emperor's plan demanded their suffering. They do not see themselves as betrayed, but as purified. They cling to faith because without it, the horror of truth would drive them mad. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is no peace, not even in faith. The Space Marines do not see civilians as children of the Emperor, but as tools of war. Yet civilians will go on believing, because belief is the only refuge left to them. Their faith blinds them, binds them, and breaks them, until all that remains is silence in the shadow of gods who will never care. To the average citizen of the Imperium, a Space Marine is not a man. He is a giant, a god of war encased in ceramite, a living weapon shaped only for death. To see one is rare, to stand in his shadow rarer still. But when war comes, when the skies thunder with drop pods and the world burns, civilians come face to face with the angels of death, and in those moments, they learn a truth too dreadful to speak aloud. Space Marines do not see them as men and women. They do not see them as lives with worth. They see them as obstacles, liabilities, and tools to be used or discarded in the Emperor's endless war. The civilians of a world under siege live in terror long before the Marines arrive. The skies darken with xenoships or the stench of chaos warbands, and the population flees in panic. Families crowd into shelters, churches overflow with desperate prayers, streets choke with bodies struggling to escape the slaughter. To them, salvation comes in the form of the Adeptus Astartes. The stories paint them as saviors, as champions who come to defend mankind from extinction. Mothers whisper to their children of the angels who will descend from the stars to save them, of armored warriors who fight for humanity. They believe this because they must. Without hope, there is only despair. And then the drop pods fall. The ground shudders as ceramite shells crash into the streets, cratering stone and steel alike. The hatches explode open, and giants step forth. They tower above mortals, their armor painted with heraldry older than empires, their weapons spitting death in every direction. To the terrified civilians, they are gods incarnate. Their presence fills the air with awe and fear. But as the people kneel, as they cry in joy, as they reach out to touch the boots of their saviors, the truth emerges. The Marines do not look down at them with compassion. Their eyes hidden behind lenses are cold, empty, and fixed only on war. The first lesson civilians learn is silence. A Space Marine does not tolerate disorder among the masses. When crowds surge forward, when voices cry out, when panic erupts, the Marines cut through it not with words, but with violence. Bolt pistols bark into the air, or into bodies if necessary. A child clinging to a Marine's greave may be shoved aside, bones breaking beneath the casual force. An old man screaming for help may be silenced with a strike that crushes his jaw. Not out of cruelty, not out of malice, but because such things are irrelevant. The civilians are noise, and noise distracts from war. For the Space Marine, the only measure of worth is usefulness to the mission. A civilian who can carry ammunition, who can lead them through a city's underhive, who can offer information about enemy movements, such a one may be allowed to live a little longer. But civilians who falter, who slow the advance, who question orders, these are discarded, often with a single bolt round. To the Marines, this is not cruelty, it is necessity. They are bred for efficiency, for focus, for war without compromise. To them, mercy is weakness, and hesitation is betrayal of the Emperor's will. The people who survive the first hours of battle often follow behind the Marines, clinging to their shadows, convinced that to remain close is to remain safe. But safety is an illusion. The Marines draw fire like magnets, their presence turning streets into killing grounds. Civilians who huddle nearby are shredded by enemy gunfire, consumed by flames, trampled beneath armored boots. The Marines do not look back. They do not grieve. To them, civilians are not companions. They are dust caught in the storm, and when the storm passes, nothing remains. And yet, there are moments more terrible still. When the enemy surges in overwhelming force, when the mission falters, when retreat becomes necessary, It is the civilians who pay the price. Marines have been known to herd crowds into the teeth of the foe, using their bodies as shields, buying precious seconds with flesh and blood. Others purge entire blocks of civilians suspected of harboring heretics or Xenos sympathizers, exterminating thousands in the span of minutes. To the Imperium, these are tragedies. To the Marines, they are calculations. Better that 1,000,000 die than a single mission fail. Better that cities burn than that the Emperor's work be undone. What civilians rarely understand, even in their last moments, is that Space Marines do not see themselves as men, and so they cannot see civilians as equals. They are transhuman, remade, reshaped, indoctrinated from childhood to see themselves as weapons. Empathy is ground out of them in the crucibles of their chapters. They learn to see civilians not as brothers, sisters, fathers, or mothers, but as the flock, a mass to be protected in theory, but in practice, a burden to be endured. Their true loyalty is not to the masses of mankind, but to their chapter, their brothers, and the Emperor's mission. Everything else is irrelevant. The civilians feel this in the coldness of the Marines' presence. They feel it in the way their pleas go unanswered, in the way their tears are ignored, in the way the Marines move through burning streets without once stopping to aid the wounded or gather the lost. They feel it when a Marine lifts a child not to save her, but to hurl her from his path. They feel it when the saviors turn their bolters on those too slow to obey orders. They feel it in the silence that follows, the silence of gods who walk among mortals but see nothing worth saving, and yet the tragedy is deeper still. For civilians will continue to believe. They will continue to worship the angels of death, to praise them as saviors, even as their neighbors are cut down, even as their children are trampled. They will convince themselves that the cruelty is mercy, that the coldness is justice, that the Marines care, even when all evidence proves otherwise. Hope is all they have, and so they twist horror into salvation, cruelty into compassion. To believe otherwise would be to admit the truth, that mankind's protectors do not care for mankind at all. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is no peace, no salvation, not even from the angels of death. For the Space Marines do not see civilians as lives to be saved, but as shadows in their war, flickering briefly before being consumed. They are gods of war, not men of mercy. And when they descend from the skies, they bring not safety, but silence,